get back to this because I've just finished making 3 very large jugs of sangria.
Have you drunk the 3 very large jugs of sangria, David? This is
We'll see, won't we? We'll see. Give me half an hour. Welcome to Cloud Realities, a conversation show exploring the practical and exciting alternate realities unleashed through cloud-driven transformation. I'm Dave Chapman.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And this week, in a year where economic headwinds continue to be strong, we're going to return to the subject of FinOps. This is something we've looked at from a number of different dimensions across the course of the season. We've looked at it from a point of view of overlaps with sustainability and green ops. We've looked at it from a point of view of how you deal with business case and economics. And today we're going to take a step back. And we're going to take a look at the basics of FinOps and then how you can create tooling and new practices to really mature the way that you're looking at your cloud economics. But before we get to that, so Rob and I were chatting this morning, and we're actually doing some production work for a change on season 4 and doing some prep. And Rob had spent the week, just as a bit of context, Rob had spent the week in a time zone a couple of hours ahead of the time zone here in the UK. And as we were going along in the conversation, I said to Rob, "Hey, Rob, I just dropped a presentation in the channel. Just have a quick look at it." And a look of sort of combination of sort of horror and deep confusion came across Rob's face when he was literally trying to process the fact that I'd sent him this presentation in the future because his laptop was still set for the time zone that he was in before. Now, anybody can make that kind of mistake, but it was watching Rob trying to process the fact I might be a time traveler. It was really quite excellent. Anyway, that was a moment of confusion. What else has been confusing you this week, Robert?
That was 20 seconds of pain this morning, that Dave. Just to explain to listeners, I had 2 or 3 devices and they all had different time settings because when they came back, they hadn't set. Anyway, that's so I was confused. But this week, Dave, I have also been mainly confused about, have you heard about the 1-week strategy?
I have not.
So the 1-week strategy is similar. We talk about organizations shouldn't set a massive, great big annual strategy. And we've talked about, 3 months is probably practical. Yep. And then you have to adjust and pivot. Mm-hmm. There is a theory rising that actually, if your organization is capable, the 1-week strategy is the way to go. And when I first heard this, I thought that is utter bobbins. There's no way that's going to work.
It makes my head hurt just thinking about it.
Right. But the idea is every Monday morning, you reset your corporate strategy. Not in a big way, but you constantly adjust it, right? So you've got this ever-adjusting thing. And I thought, well, actually, that may be quite good because you become very respondent to market condition changes if your organization was set up to be able to consume a strategy change that frequently. But then I thought about, actually, the majority of organizations would probably be on their knees crying at the CEO changing the strategy every week. And I was confused about how much you'd have to put into an organization to be able to cope with a 1-week strategy. And is it just a thing that people have come up with because it's interesting clickbait type conversation? Or with the way we're reducing strategy cycles, it's actually something that we're going to get to. And I am quite confused about it because I can see some value to it, but I can also see utter confusion raining off the back of it if your comms process, for example, isn't good enough.
Yeah. So I think most organizations at the moment are struggling with the idea of coming off like a 3-year plan or a 1-year plan and moving to like a 3-month plan. But I do think there is some merit in that Monday morning meeting. In my head, though, that will be more of a context-setting conversation than necessarily a strategic pivot. And, maybe 1 in every 12 meetings is going to be substantial enough to merit some form of strategic pivot. But perhaps, most weekly sessions like that would be like a market scan type conversation.
Yeah, to check. And I think it takes huge courage for the double loops to go back and actually address the strategy constantly. And many dogmatically stick to their strategy even though it's hurting them and they continue to plow through.
Like Kodak.
Which they just wouldn't change even though the writing was on the wall. And they could have affected that and made a difference, and come back. But they didn't. And it's that, maybe it's the mindset approach that says, I'll constantly not be afraid to change my strategy if I need to change it based on what I see going on. And maybe that's the value in it.
Yeah, I think we can park that one there for now because I agree. I think that is
the courage to change.
Yeah, the wisdom in it, I think, is that the world is moving fast and you have to move fast and you have to keep an eye on that and then, not be afraid to change. So good one, Rob. Are your timings all right now? You settled in GMT or BST, whatever the hell we're in.
I'm back in British summertime, and everything is synced and no longer having mass confusion. But I did, for one moment, think you were a time traveler, Dave, because you sent me a PowerPoint 1 hour in the future. That's confusing the hell out of me.
Well, look, on to the subject of today. We are lucky to have with us Roi Ravhon. He's the chief executive and founder of Finout. Roi, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Do you want to just say hello, introduce yourself, and say a word or two about Finout?
Sure. Thank you guys so much for having me. So my name is Roi, one of the founders and CEO of Finout. Finout is a company in the cloud cost management space, a certified FinOps platform. We are 3.5 years old, raised $45 million till date, approaching 50 employees, sitting partly in Tel Aviv and partly in New York. And I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's start with Finout, shall we? Just tell us a little bit about how it came about, Roi. What was the moment and what was the sort of founding purpose? What observations were you making that you thought the market was missing?
Yeah, so in my previous role, I was engineering director in a company called Logs.io, which is like Datadog's Splunk competitor, which means that we needed to process like lots of data for logs and observability data all across our infrastructure. And a huge part of our day-to-day was to essentially balance between cost and SLA and give proper reporting to management about like what's happening and why. So it's very easy to build a company like that, throwing a bunch of money on AWS, but when it needs to be financially viable, it starts to be a significantly bigger challenge. And management kept on asking us to produce breakdown of the cost, like how much do we pay for each service, for each team, for each customer, what's our gross margin is, and how do we track down unit economics and make sure that the 5% growth we had on AWS this month makes sense or not. And we were using one of the market leaders, try to build more infrastructure on top of it to get the insight that we want to do. And essentially we failed miserably till we decided that there's a huge inefficiency here and we need to build a tool that we wanted to use. So we decided to leave Logs.io and start Finout.
And when you were looking around at the point you were making that decision, was there no other tool on the market that could have done the job for you?
Yeah, so the existing incumbents were very slow, very hard to use, very inflexible. And, the infrastructure of the cloud continued to run forward, right? So we started to have Kubernetes. We were running multi-cloud, multi-service. We started to have CDNs into the mix, security products, data warehouses. So lots of stuff are part of our FinOps approach. And, we're still stuck to the cloud with manual tagging with what the existing toolings are giving us. So it was no just a tool that doesn't do the work right. It was an inefficiency in the way that we approach the cloud. So we needed to change something drastically in the way that we approach this.
I think that point about the need to, especially in a pay-as-you-go type environment, the want to understand that when a click occurs, what is the true cost to serve and be able to track that through your architecture. That's a very complicated thing to do because there's a load of base work you need to do to be able to say that actually then you can create the view that says it's £100 per person, we need to get it to 50 or whatever, and then you can track that type of spend down through efficiency gains, etc. It's
a classic outside-in style problem, isn't it? Which is from the outside, it's quite straightforward about what you need information about, but from the inside out, to provide that information in a clear-cut and straightforward way, you're right, is complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of change in that environment, and and it's hard sometimes to sort of to simplify something that's fundamentally complicated.
Yeah, modern infrastructure are insanely complex, and the more we move from our on-prem data centers to the cloud, some enterprise are modernizing, some enterprise just lifting and shifting, most are just a combination of both. So it's just create an infrastructure that is unbearably complicated, continue to grow, spike out of cost with complete unexpectancy of what we actually planned or the TCO analysis that the cloud providers gave us, and we end up with a lot more questions than what we had answers for, because the tools that were used to manage the on-prem infrastructure are practically useless in the cloud, right? So you have you're in SAP, you have one line that says AWS. Great. What am I doing with that?
Yeah, that's maybe a little oversimplified from the outside in.
I don't know, Dave. I think there's some organisations out there that go, "Oh, there's a bill. Right, we must pay that then. What did it do for us again? I'm not entirely sure, but hey.
The number's bigger than it was last month.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a group of CFOs who get together and curse the cloud every month. They have a support group where they go, we don't know what the organization's done, but we've received an invoice and it's large.
It keeps 100%. Getting bigger. It keeps getting bigger. And the printers still aren't working.
Yeah, exactly.
So describe what you actually built then, Roy. So what was the process through which you built it, and maybe wind in a little bit of FinOps 101 as we go through the description of what you ended up building.
Sure. So maybe let's start with FinOps. FinOps is the framework and the codification of what we used to do for years to come, and essentially it's how can we tie cloud financial across the entire organization. We want to make everyone informed about every decision that they make and take cost into consideration of our day-to-day lives. And in order to do that, we need to democratize cloud financial information. We need to make sure that everyone has the right data in the right form, that we support budgeting processes, that we support forecasting processes, that we support cost allocation and showback and chargebacks. And we also find, inefficiencies in the cloud and find anomalies and negotiate better rates. And there's a bunch of different frameworks that the FinOps Foundation are doing an amazing job codifying. So when we built Finout, we understood that we needed to break down the problem into multiple segments. So first is it's a data sanitation problem. Each cloud vendor has its own structure of what the bills are. So AWS has its own method, GCP has its own method, Azure, Oracle. And there are also lots of tools that don't have any billing information, but still are notoriously expensive, right? So like Datadog, Databricks, Snowflake, Confluent. So we needed to build a generic framework that could take costs from multiple different providers and sanitize it into something that makes sense for the organization, and we can start to build on top of it. Another big problem for modern FinOps is that we often consume different units that what we actually pay for. So I think Kubernetes is one of the prime examples here because we pay AWS and GCP and Azure by the instance, but we're actually running pods behind the scenes. And pods are running, in some virtual manner on the instances. We need to translate the cost. And this problem keeps on repeating. So we're buying a big S3 bucket, but we're using folders. We're paying Snowflake by credits and storage, but we're running queries and utilizing warehouses. So we need to do that translation and essentially inflate the bills into line items that were not existing before and do it using commoditized set of metrics. So we connect not only to the cloud provider, but also to the telemetry data that the company is already using in order to inflate the information and provide a very big, large data set we can start to work with. So that's the basic layer of FinOut that we call the mega bill, which is essentially a very complicated data modeling problem that we simplified with the marketing name.
And that's a great name for it, the mega bill, which is the totality. I'm doing an arm thing on screen, but you won't see it. It's like I'm getting audio and visual mixed up again, Dave. Sorry.
Not unlike you to be confused by something, Robert. What's my experience then, Roy, as a consumer of it? So from the outside in, so you've explained like the build up to the mega bill, and then from the outside in as a consumer, ideally, what am I looking for? And then what's my experience of it?
Yeah. So, now we have all the data ready for you, but honestly, you don't care about it, right? So as a business, you ask yourself business questions. You don't ask yourself, how much CPUs do I have in the cloud? That's not interesting. Right. So we allow you to create a very complicated cost allocation layer on top of the information and essentially answer business questions on the fly. So you care about how much money do you spend per team. You care about what's your gross margin. You care about what's the cost per customer and what's the cost per storage across multiple different cloud providers because, we're in a modern cloud world. So the questions are a lot more business oriented and ever changing. And we need to keep that mapping and help the organization deal with infrastructure that's changing beneath their feet, yet assigning all the dollars that they're spending on the cloud into their rightful owner and business owners, essentially.
So how complex can the views get then? Have you built business rules in above the top of the core data, the core sort of technical cloud data, so you can apply it to either application or value stream or something like that?
Yeah, so you can start to define like mappings as complicated as you wish, including hierarchies and time mappings. Like, enterprise constantly changing organizational structure. So what happens if one team moves from one group to another? What do you do with the cost of that team? Do you keep it, the new group and the old group? You don't want to change budgets in retrospective. Many organizations are building their SEC reporting based on those data, right? So how do I properly report and allocate and make sure that I'm meeting my target numbers and margins without changing the history? So it starts to get very, very complicated. So Finout supports, a full set of cost allocation in the org, including also shared costs, which is also one of the biggest problem in FinOps now, right? We have a big database and 5 different teams uses it, but one team consumes more queries than another team. So how do you allocate that for showback and chargeback purposes, right? We need to build them based on the units they consume.
And that's a very mature way to be able to apply the organizational dynamic into the structure and then model around it, because often people is accounted for differently in an organization, but it's still a big part of cost to serve, yeah? The support of the human to be able to make the reality true for whatever value stream or business process you're talking about. So, and that must bring a lot of light from your experience into how organizations view costs. Do you see that where it's like the sort of realization occurs, and then do organizations use that and change effectively off the back of it? Have you found?
So what we are trying to help organizations do is essentially change the relationship with cloud spend. So it's no longer a tax. It's no longer, something that you just have to pay the cloud providers. It's an investment, and you need to start to measure the ROI. Eventually, by allocating costs properly, you can start to tackle which team owns what was their business purpose, how much are they tracking towards the money that they brought into the business, and is it worth it to make that investment or not, and where should we pick, the right sets of optimizations. So it's a lot more organizational thing than a technical one.
Yeah, and it's that view that IT shouldn't be a cost center and pushed into the corner, but it's the thing that generates value. And you're helping visualize hello, look what it's done, got this growth, made this change. This is actually how you apportion it all. And you get a proper business view over the top of what technology is doing for you.
Exactly.
So maybe you could draw a distinction for us, Roy, based on that sort of the organizational arrangement around it. So if FinOps 101 is, I'm correctly tagging my cloud usage and I'm able to apportion that out to businesses as some form of invoice or statement for that month or that week's compute. If that's the basics, what does state of the art look like in your mind?
State of the art is we're approaching 100% cost allocation. It means that every dollar that we spend, we know the reason for. We're reducing down shadow IT. We're tracking down unit economics. So we not really care about how the absolute amount of money that we pay for AWS, because that's kind of meaningless. Because the more business we bring, the more we need to pay. And as long as that correlation remains, that's fine, right? So we want to track down what's the cost per event, cost per click, cost per transaction, cost per user, cost per whatever that we're making, and make sure that the entire organization is informed about it. Every developer logs into Finout on a daily basis, getting the cost information that is relevant for their specific service. They are the budget owner for the cloud spend, and the entire organization working together on cloud financial management instead of, there's a FinOps officer that keeps on nagging people to do stuff.
And that's the thing though, isn't it? Because they often start with a centralized view and it's seen as the team that nag you. Yeah. And it's like, oh, they're here again. They're going to tell me something I haven't done quite right this day. But I think with the proper organizational alignment and the understanding that you bring to this view, then it helps bring an accountability in a different way that makes people care about what they're doing.
Maybe just to extend that just one or two steps further as well, which is it's indicative, isn't it, of the modern style of working here, which is you don't have bits and pieces of the organization that are sort of governing with a hard G and kind of acting like the cops. What you do is you empower the developer, you empower the people that are working, and then provide them with the tooling and information for them to make the right decisions and make clear through principles how they then should execute kind of securely, ethically, performantly, etc.
And it's that thing where actually FinOps is a thing that starts when you start to design your architecture, cut your code, think about the way it's going to operate. I had to bring it in, Dave. I had to bring it in.
We're 28 minutes into this recording at this point. and the A word. First time it's come up.
Dave, it's my job. You can't let me not do my job. No, but the point is that there's an awareness thing that people who think properly cloud native, efficiency is the first part of the conversation that comes in about how we're going to build this architecture to serve the business purpose. I think that's a key part, but that comes from understanding how architectures perform in live. So if you're able to observe how it's working today, then you're able to loop the learning round and adapt it.
Right on. Maybe then, Roy, have you got a case study here? Because one of the things that seems to be the case at the moment is that not many people are yet doing this, even at 101 level, that well. Never mind at the sort of state of the art that you describe with the developer enablement aspect of the end of the spectrum. Have you seen anybody that's kind of got that far down? And I guess the other sort of half of the real world question that I'll just put out now is about the economic conditions that we find ourselves in this year. And, everybody's tightening their belts and making much more forensic decisions and being very metered on what investments are required, what the day-to-day spend looks like, and is there direct business value coming from it, just because the economic conditions are a little harder at the moment. So do you have an observation on that maybe to start with, and then is there a good case study that illustrates what we've been talking about?
Yeah, 100%. So FinOps has a very different maturity levels throughout businesses. It's not necessarily tied to the size of the company. We often see amazingly advanced Fortune 50s with their FinOps practice, yet 1,000 people company that are spending $1 million a month. They don't understand even why. So it can really change drastically between what's happening. And something that we're working with Finout with our customers is help them not get to the best and state of the art, but to get to what makes sense for them over the next 12 months. So one case that I can share is that, we have one of the fastest growing companies in the world that is super advanced with their FinOps practices. The day-to-day operations of the company is based on cloud. They're spending a lot of money, and getting to cost per customer is the way that they actually price their businesses. So when they issue new quote to customers that log into Finout, they can see the entire breakdown of cost per customer for the specific use cases. What's the cost for each, bullet item that they bought, and then they can construct like a better pricing for the net customer. They can really understand their margin. They can analyze like what's each architectural decision can look back into their existing customers and what's the impact on the margins going to be. So that's like a very, very advanced FinOps use case that we're really, really proud of supporting. And to take the other route, so we have one Fortune 500 that is using Finout in order to build their budget cycle. So they're really relatively early days into their FinOps work, and now they're just trying to get everyone to care or just meet the budgets that they stated. So they created, full organizational mapping using the Finout architecture, the tagging that I explained before. And now they have the entire organization rolled up all the way to the enterprise in budgeting. And what they did is to start and push down ownership for every engineering director on the respective piece that they had on the budget side, just for the sake of let's keep you informed, let's keep you understand how you're tracking, and you start to be accountable for what you're doing, the same as you start to be accountable for the SLA of your service and the latency of the production environment. But now you also have to track down on the budget of it. So they used Finout just to start to create that kind of organizational hierarchy, while the centralized FinOps team is still working on the day-to-day basis.
And just to touch on the economic conditions point, are you seeing a changing nature of customer conversation or more acceleration of this type of work, say over the course of the last 6 or 12 months, as the economy as the economic headwinds have got a little stronger?
100%. I love to see the growth of the FinOps Foundation. Not sure when this airs, but next week we're heading to San Diego for the annual FinOps X conference. And this year it's amazing. There's so many vendors, so many people, so many events. Like, it's a huge FinOps festival. Only 2 years ago, yeah, FinOps Festival. And only 2 years ago, we were 300 people at a sub-conference in a hotel in Austin. Like, this was the FinOps community out there. So the world is really, really changing very fast. Companies really care about what's happening for the cloud cost. Companies are being tasked with it. It's a board level discussion with many organizations that we hear. We start to see the CIO like tasked with, okay, now we need to deal with cloud costs. So it's no longer something we can cross our fingers and hope that will be okay at some point.
I often wondered that. So many organizations now understand the importance of FinOps. Their maturity in FinOps is on a slider range. Many are in the 101 end that we discussed, but I'll do an ad hoc confused. I'm often confused about, was there an organization that just went, we best get on FinOps, day one because it's going to be an issue, versus the ones that got the surprise, your bill's higher than you thought, and then they go, best get into FinOps then. And I wonder what the percentage split is, and I suspect it's probably more the latter than the former.
I'm saying that's probably true.
Yeah. Organizations that were born in the cloud understand that cloud is expensive.
Yeah.
So you start to see them often like creating FinOps practices as part of what you're doing. If you look at the large enterprise, it's usually not the case. They start to migrate to the cloud because someone decided that they need to move to the cloud. No one in the organization understands what the cloud is even. And now they need to design a huge system. So they retain someone like you guys to help them with the cloud migration. And oftentimes the FinOps aspect of it is just overseen because we're so into let's start to build the cloud migration. Let's start to design what's the process going to look like. It's going to be a 5 years process down the line. And at some point, usually just get a huge bill shock. They're just extremely surprised with what happened. AWS, is working together with them to show them what's the cost of migration is going to look like, and it's often not true. So now we need to start to track back and say, okay. Let's pause here for a second. Let's understand the economics of this move, and now let's continue to design and take FinOps as a driving factor when designing.
And it's a very good point, because there are two types of bill shock. There's the one where a developer put 10,000 servers in the config file as opposed to 10. Or there's the one where the architecture has started doing what it needs to do, and it's much more expensive than you expect. The first one you can turn off and fix. The second one, the bill's going to come in next month and the next month and the next month, because you just can't turn your business systems off.
Are you saying that was an architecture problem, Rob? That's what I heard. I mean, that's what I heard.
You can believe what you want, though. So, architects are usually the answer, not the problem. That's all I'm going to say.
Now, I have tried to move past this, but I can't. I need to go back to the FinOps Festival. So, give us an insight, Roy, of what it's like. What goes on. And I'm both legitimately interested in what's being examined from a sort of state-of-the-art next-generation FinOps perspective, but I'm also wondering what the parties are like. So,
do you take all the money that you've saved in cloud and you spend it on a massive party? I mean, that would be ace, wouldn't it? How much did we save this year? Right, let's go, off to Hawaii.
Like a gain share situation.
Gain share. The more you save, the better the party.
And the FinOps community are the best in the world at gain share. So can you imagine the parties? The possibility of this, right? Just in a couple of minutes of thinking about it is absolutely massive. So are you guys living into the potential of this?
Yeah, so the party on the first day is on the USS Midway in San Diego. Last year it was amazing, and we're really looking forward for this year. So FinOps know how to party as well.
That sounds like a bumper sticker if ever there was one.
FinOps know how to party. Gonna get that printed out, yeah.
I think that's the episode title right there.
I think we've got it sorted.
In all seriousness, it's a really amazing couple of days. You have FinOps practitioners from all around the world, mostly the US, coming to be together, to share best practices, to work and collaborate. FinOps community is extremely collaborative. Often surprised by the level of share and level of frankness that a large organization are getting into, and really starts to tell success stories, to tell failure stories, to adapt best practices, to learn from one another. And it's a very community event, more than you just sit at a conference show every day and hear someone talking about what's good or bad.
And I suppose from a conference perspective, if you go to some of the cloud conferences, they're multi-purpose because there's lots of things there. But with FinOps, at the basis level, you have a single shared mission, which is to basically save. And so all the strategies and everything align to a single goal, which probably that shared purpose probably helps the conference have a real good, as you say, the collaboration across it to say we're all trying to get to the same answer.
It's a new practice. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to teach. It's often evolving very, very quickly. So one organization managed to do something very, very cool. They want to share it with the rest of the group. It's not something, it's not a trade secret that I want to keep on my own because it's a business kind of gain that I got over the rest. Rather, we're all in this together. We all can share. We all can collaborate. Even the vendors are helping and pitching in with data points and data sets and helping with the collaboration wherever we can.
Very good. So maybe just to bring our conversation today to a little bit of a close, maybe, Roy, for those organizations that are 101 and they're trying to get to grips with what's going on in their environments and, perhaps they've got some license negotiations coming up or perhaps they've had bill shock. What would your advice be in terms of the first 2 or 3 steps that they might take to be able to get this under control?
What we always say to customers that FinOps is not something you buy. FinOps is an organizational decision you take. We often get customers that want to buy Finout and say, "No, guys, you're not ready. Like, there's no point of even starting to do a POC. You're too early in the process of what you're doing."
So, Roy, just to bring our conversation today to a little bit of a close, perhaps you could give us some advice on what the first 2 or 3 steps might be if you're one of those organizations that maybe has just had bill shock. They maybe have a contractual negotiation coming up and need to get their arms around their environments. Where do I start?
So FinOps is an organizational decision. It's not a tooling one. It's not a budget one. So the first thing to do is decide that you want to embrace FinOps. Joining the FinOps Foundation, start to read, start to learn, start to design your FinOps practice and the way that how you imagine good looks like. Only then you can start to go and understand what tooling do you need? Do you need to buy one? Do you need to start using the native tooling from the cloud providers first? What's the end state in how your engineers are going to care, and how do you get engineers to care? Do you incentivize? Do you go with the carrot or the stick? So there's lots of decisions to be made that are right for the specific organization, a specific culture, and there's a proper design phase to do first, and invest in the organizational kind of state of mind before leaning into anything else.
All right, Rob, you all set?
Yeah, of course, always. Dave, I come to these podcasts prepared.
On ready.
Sometimes I over-prepare knowing that you're involved. Just saying, calling it out.
Fair enough.
Hashtag somebody cares.
Fair enough. Have you done any research in this week, Rob?
Sorry, I had to do that one again, actually, Dave. I was just about to say, some of us were working for this bit and some of us were making sangria. I'm not telling the audience who was doing which one, but anyway, I'm doing the research.
I think both types of research are equally valid.
I enjoy both.
Contextually different, admittedly.
One is much use to this process and other is not so much use to this process. But we'll leave it there.
We're thinking about new formats for season 4, so There
you go. Anyway, go on, start again, do it again.
No, we're going to leave all that in.
No, you can't do that.
We totally leave it in.
You don't want the audience to understand that I'm doing all the hard work.
Of course
that
I do.
Can't be done.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we'll roll with that. So, Dave, this week I have been mainly looking at what actually impacts cost in the cloud. So we've had a great conversation there with lots of things, and we've seen a very advanced approach to how it can be. But there are some real basics that you need to grasp when you think about the cost view of cloud. And so I was going to run down them, and some are yin and yang and others are just one way. But the first one, I think, is thinking cloud commercials are the same, and just thinking that you're going to have pay as you go and that's it, and not optimizing your commercial spend. So not thinking about reserving instances and entering into a different commercial relationship with the cloud provider. That's mistake number one, which is you should be optimizing your commercials because that's the basis for what you're going to pay.
Just as a side note, on this, right?
Yeah.
I'm quite disappointed in that's where we've ended up with the cloud.
What do you mean?
It's like the beauty of the cloud is it's instant on, instant off. Yet we've now managed to make commercial arrangements that create like 3 and 5 year, commercial frameworks and stuff. It's like, This isn't Cloud Nirvana, Robert.
Oh, come on. It's sales though, isn't it? Buy one Apple versus buy 10, you get a discount. It's been going on for thousands of years. I
am putting a line in the sand, Rob. I don't like it.
You don't like it. Register. Well, why don't you write a strongly worded letter to the head of AWS, Azure and GCP and find out what the response is?
Good thought.
Stick that one on the list to do this weekend.
Yeah.
The other one is a way you control access to platform. So many have uncontrolled access to the resources, capabilities of the cloud. So guess what? Everybody double clicks on yes and boom, you have a bill shock. There's a lack of architectural adaptation. I know how much you love this bit, but actually if you don't change your architecture when you move to cloud, it's probably going to get more expensive. But if you remember the podcast we did with Liberty Mutual, they went to a completely serverless-based architecture and rewrote their core, and they saved like 70%. So it's a mass architectural adaptation. Really ambitious, will save you an absolute packet.
If anybody ever says on this show, Robert, that architects don't give value for money and can't be linked to business value, I think we've got at least one case study to prove otherwise.
I will tell you a stat at this point, David.
Go on.
For every £1 spent on a good architecture, you will save 5 in cost elsewhere. It's an industry stat.
Where did you get it from?
I just made it up. No, it is true. I forget where it comes from, though. I'll have to find out, actually. The next one is, as we continue, there's no change to the operating model, right? So as you just said, Roy, FinOps is a way of being. You have to embrace it. It has to be baked into your core. Not doing that means that you don't have the operational ways of working that controls. We talked about the developers and the engineers and everybody else and the testers seeing the cost of their actions in cloud and then being able to change their ways of working associated with that. Very important. Lack of automation's a cracker in it. So if you're not using it, shut it down. The amount of crime in cloud associated with environments left running is quite spectacular, and that's often like that. And that's a real basic one. Turn it off if you're not using it. That's the whole point of the pay as you go, isn't it?
Not just financial crime either. Environmental impact increasingly for environments being left up, and that will be increasingly the case as those environments get more and more powerful, more and more sophisticated, particularly those that are training artificial intelligence.
There was one instance I do remember very vividly, was the developers were left in control of the environments they fired up in the cloud, and they were basically firing up production level environments, and they were using some very heavyweight tooling, and guess what? Cost went up fast. So it's that scaling as well and thinking about what you actually need and the resources for the job in hand. And then finally, the basics, which is not training on cloud. So I think we called it out earlier, organizations that aren't used to it move there and get some massive shocks about what cloud actually is and how you need to operate around cloud. So sort of a list of basics that if you haven't got those properly in control and you've thought about them, then your costs are going to go plus through the roof.
In the conversations you're having, Roy, with customers, to take Rob's 5 or 6 points there or maybe add a few more to it, you're seeing that type of pattern in a lot of organizations still? Because actually a lot of what Rob described, you would think would be Cloud 101 stuff, right? Change your architectures, good developer practice, lots of automations, all of those sorts of things. You'd think, yep, Cloud 101, every cloud transformation program puts that sort of stuff in place and then, changes how they operate and move forward successfully. Not quite the case though, is it?
No. Like I did Rob, your first point about cloud commitments, it should be trivial. You don't even think about it. Like, it's not as you're going out of the cloud, just commit. It's going to be cheaper, whatever you do. And so many organizations are spending years trying to figure out what's the proper commitment structure. And they're analyzing it from so many different angles and what's the right strategy and how do we approach it. No, just buy commitments. It's very easy. You don't need to think about it. And I think the most costly mistake though in cloud is thinking of cloud as an on-prem environment that is just, running on AWS. That's not the case. If you're gonna, I think, even without listening to the Liberty Mutual kind of episode, I'm sure that they were lifted and shifted before, and now they architected it to adapt to modern cloud architectures. So this is such a common practice. We see it constantly across the board. And moving to the cloud without understanding what cloud is the number one money waster.
I'm glad you said that, because that brought my reputation to the list plus, because if you said no, I don't see any of those in there. I don't know what you're talking about.
It used to be like that, but that's old thinking.
Yeah, you're out of date.
But like that will be the last time Rob does the research for this show.
Rob no longer appears on Cloud Realities podcast in the future.
I might have had to leap in with a section on sangria.
That was a high stakes question. That was, yeah.
Well, look, Roy, thank you very much for spending a bit of time with us this afternoon and walking us through some actually really very important components of not only FinOps 101, but actually where you can take this. And I like the way you put it around the conference, which is like it's an emerging discipline. And I think we're going to see practices for this grow and grow over the coming years.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I had an amazing time.
Great. Well, look, we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guest what they're excited about doing next. And that could be you've got an amazing jug of sangria just sitting in your kitchen waiting for you when you get downstairs.
Starting to get worried about you, Dave. Obsessive this is.
Can't stop thinking about it. Or you're doing something interesting in your professional life coming up. So, Roy, what are you excited about doing next?
Actually, one of the biggest changes of my life are coming soon. My wife is pregnant.
Congratulations.
In a couple of months, we're expecting a baby boy. So this is a major part of my expectations nowadays.
It's your first, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Oh, well, good luck with that one.
Wonderful. Have you established a decent economic framework for this, Roy?
Let's be honest, children and money pits. That's the only way to describe it.
If you think going into the cloud financially unprepared is going to cost you a lot of money, brace yourself for the next 18 years, my friend.
I'm going to buy diaper commitments.
Exactly.
Why can't you maybe there's a new economic model we've just discovered, diaper commitments. You say, well, I'm probably going to have 3 kids, so I'll commit to this amount of diaper spend and then you give you a 30% discount. That could be a thing.
We should have brought this up on the Ultimate Shopping Experience episode.
I think
like new models. We're inventing new models as we go along.
If you think about it, there's probably a product you've been buying for 10 years of your life, right? Yeah. Or whatever, a bit of brand loyalty. If you committed 10 years ago, what discount could you have had? There you go.
Just think about all that free whiskey you could be drinking now, Rob.
Vats of it. Yeah.
Well, Roy, what an amazing thing you have coming up and a very, very exciting part of your life about to emerge. So we wish you the very best for that.
Thank you so much.
So a huge thank you to our guest this week, Roy. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks also to our sound and editing wizard, Ben and Louis, our absent and always on holiday producer, Marcel, and of course to all our listeners. We're on LinkedIn and X, Dave Chapman and Rob Kernahan. Feel free to follow or connect with us, and please get in touch if you have any comments or ideas for the show. And of course, if you haven't already done that, rate and subscribe to our podcast. See you in another reality next week.